YouTube, Chris for Audio Obsession, back with another video. Actually, this is a response video to a contest being held by James, who has a YouTube channel who goes by the name Stormwind79. So he had just recently actually surpassed 200 subs. So he's putting on a contest for 5 to 10 albums, 5 to 10 innovative albums in your collection. So first off, I'd like to congratulate James on hitting and surpassing. You're at around like almost 220 now, I believe, somewhere around there. So yeah, great job. I'll leave a link for people who haven't visited before his page, and go check him out. He's got some great content. I especially enjoy his attention to detail in the black metal community. He's got quite a vast variety of knowledge on black metal bands, and I think that definitely has him standing out amongst the crowds. I'm still trying to figure out how I stand out in the crowds, but in his content, he's talking about some black metal bands that are like, I thought I knew some black metal bands, and then he's rifling off some names of stuff that I've never even heard of. So it's given me an opportunity to check out new bands that I've never seen, heard before, which basically I attribute to everybody who does these videos that I'm friends with, or that I just say, you know, follow and view. You're always gonna find something that somebody's never heard before, and yeah, he does a great job, so go check out his page. So it was actually harder than I thought it was gonna be to come up with 5 to 10. I thought I was gonna have a hard time coming up with 5, and literally I was working with like over 20 albums, and I thought, oh, I gotta try to whittle this down. So I'm around, I think I'm like 9, yeah, something like that. There's just so many albums out there that have something about it that I would find innovative and what makes them different, but I wanted to zero in on a few that kind of had it all, like a little bits of everything that made them innovative. So anyways, enough yammering on. I got a few to go through, so I'm going to get through them quick. So this first one starts off in 1968. Now, I know a lot of people would, credit, say, Black Sabbath for being the godfathers of heavy metal, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. Not at all. Do I think that maybe a band that wasn't necessarily heavy metal kind of came to the table a couple years before Sabbath released their 1970, first release? Yes, absolutely. And I would say, particularly this band, Blue Cheer, and their Vincebus Eruptum album, sorry. So, now, their most notable song, especially on this album, would be the first track, Summertime Blues. Everybody should know that song. So listen to this album and try to tell yourself, okay, 1968. So, you're in years where, like, Beatles are the heyday, and really they're not all that loud and aggressive. But you take this album, the guitar tone alone is aggressive, it's fuzzy, it gets nasty. You've got Lee Stevens on lead guitar. When he's doing some leads, they're like wall of noise leads and all over the place. And for a band back in 1968, this, where they're not shocking, but the sound, they were considered a loud band back then, like really loud. And yeah, the guitar tones, the drumming, everything, even down to the vocals, having that, you know, there's tone and melody, but raspiness, and it's like, this is something new and fresh for that early on. And to me, it's the attitude to which they were playing, and even for its time, the sound, it's like, this is where I attribute the birth of heavy metal. Like, try in 1968 to tell me that there's a band that was louder and heavier. I'd be hard pressed to believe somebody saying so. But anyways, for my first pick, very innovative for the time when this thing came out. Fantastic album. Check it out. So next is, we're gonna jump quite a few decades, and we've got the band Atheist. So obviously their first album, Piece of Time, which came out in, I think it was 89, 90, that was a pretty big album for when it came out, because you've got the start of the death metal scene kind of growing into something its own. So now you take a band like Atheist, who is in the death metal community, but they're not of the obituaries, the death, the deicide, morbid angel. This band took a different approach, and to me they brought in this musicality of like jazz type influence. The reason why I picked this album in particular, their first album was definitely a progressive album. It had like more thrashier elements to it. It was a fast, upbeat album. Now, I picked this one because I think they started to really hone their sound at this album, where it's like, no, we're not going to sound like the other death metal bands or whatever. And the more jazz influence kind of came out in their songwriting, and just the tonality of the album. Tony Choi, of course, their first album, Roger Patterson, was a killer bass player, and unfortunately it passed away. And by this time on this album, they acquired Tony Choi, who is an incredible bass player. Fingerstyle bass playing, and just unbelievable. So to have that kind of caliber. Now, of course, the guitar work on this is like just as equally phenomenal. But I loved hearing bands, especially metal bands, when the bass player wasn't just kind of sloughed off to the side. Like a certain Metallica album, which I'm not going to go discussing. I like to hear the bass player be in the forefront with the rest of the band. I loved hearing bass tone. And the tone on this and the style just stands out like crazy. And there is no band, past or present, that sounded like Atheist. They hit their own niche, and they didn't go the gory, satanic route, and I think because they were really technically proficient at the time, it kind of lumped them into a category where it was just going to be a more select market of people who were listening, who were nerds for, you know, complicated stuff. So, yeah, but anyways, fantastic album. This was also my first album that I ever bought from these guys, so it was also my introduction, which kind of leads, you know, that nostalgia too, where it's always going to be my favorite album. But really, they haven't put out any bad albums, but this was my pick for an innovative, especially for 1991 when it came out. And kind of going along the same musical style or idea, fast forward a few years to 2019, and you got Moss Upon the Skull. Now, this album is a very technically proficient death metal album, but it's not to the point where it loses you. Like, too over the top technicality. It's just like, you know, this is like a bunch of fretboard masturbation, and it's like, yeah, who can go the fastest? That's not what this is, but technically proficient, absolutely, and it's just a great idea of how to write songs, not just a typical, you know, say death metal song or album, and it's also not just a flurry of notes that you just can't understand. They've got technicality with a jazzy type influence, and just there was something about them that just made them different and made it really enjoyable. And of course, they were nice enough to sign for me. I do believe I've shown this on a video before, but yeah, this is In Vengeful Reverence, an excellent, innovative death metal album where it's not typical, it's not stale, it is certainly not boring. Definitely something to check out. Now we slow it down a little bit on this one, and this album came out in 2011, and a very different from the first couple. This would be Bellwich. So this was a repress of their actual first demo that came out in 2011. This band consisted of 2 members, the bass player, vocals, and then drummer and vocals. What made it different, so they classify, I guess they'd fall into the funeral doom aspect of the spectrum here, and it was different because you just had bass and drums. So when you're left with that much open space, it's like you kind of everything shows. So you don't have a wall of guitars to kind of mask anything. You've just got the 2 instruments, and that's it. So when you're actually listening, when it's stripped down this far, you have to do stuff to keep the listener, in my opinion, listening. And they do a fantastic job. So it's not a typical funeral doom. Basically the tone of it, yes, funeral doom, the pace, funeral doom / death doom-ish. But it's how the bass is played, where you would swear there's at least 2 people playing. And I've seen these guys live, and they're fully capable of recreating it, and it's amazing just watching the bass player do his thing, where you literally think 2 people are there playing at the same time, then doing his vocals, and then same with the drummer. It's pummeling, but also very chill. This is what I call a chill album and a chill band to listen to. I was questioned once on where do I get chill from? They get really loud. It's like, yeah, but there's no blast beats, so for me that's chill, I guess. From a metal guy, that's chill. But yeah, check out this band. Fantastic if you haven't heard. If you want something airy, spacey, doomy, be able to turn the lights off, crank it up, and this is a killer band. They've put out no bad releases. They put out some great stuff. Mirror Reaper being one of my favorite albums, especially the artwork with it, just killer stuff. But for these guys in this type of market, in their genre that they chose, I found very innovative. It was different, and everybody's always looking for something different, and this band definitely delivered. Really cool stuff. Now we'll pick up the pace a little bit, actually quite a bit on this one. So I was growing up listening to, starting off my listening experience in the very early 90s. As a kid wanting to get into heavy stuff, the heavier the better, and rock, metal music, it was huge for me, absolutely huge. And growing up in the heyday of the birth of a lot of these genres that were popping up out of metal, it was fantastic. didn't know it at the time, but now at my age looking back, it's like, what an incredible time. And it was such an incredible time to listen to find new bands, because there was stuff that was being done that hadn't been done before, so it was new and fresh, and that was probably the most exciting time for growing up in the 90s listening to this style of music. And during a time when the black metal craze started growing into its own entity, there was a band that was kind of shunned for coming into the same genre but not fully fitting in. And I've talked about this album before a few times, and this would be The Principle of Evil Made Flesh by Cradle of Filth. Amazing album. For the time when this came out, it was extremely innovative, and it was very different and very unique. So during the time when these guys came out, they didn't fit in with the black metal, with your Emperors, your Dark Thrones. Like, they did not have the typical, I guess, the purest black metal sound. They had elements of death metal, speed, little bits of thrash, heavy metal-ish sometimes here and there, and very theatric. So of course they came out with their, you can see they had all the makeup stuff, just like the rest of the black metal guys. It's just they didn't fall into the same category, and because of course they were different, they became very popular quickly, which the purists will tend to shun them. So it's like, how dare you get popular, right? You can't get popular. That's not what this music's about. Whatever. It happens. They came out with an amazing album, and not one band sounded like this, and these guys sounded like no other band at the time. So it was very, very different, very explosive. When this came out, I've got my original CD tucked away back there, that I had ordered special when I found out about this band coming out. And yeah, fantastic stuff. Very, very different for its time, and just extremely influential on, you didn't have to just do the recording in your bathroom black metal. Like, you could have vision on something different, something bigger, but still part of the same community. And yeah, fantastic album, a must-have. And especially on this 2017 repress that I got, man, does it ever sound good. Excellent, excellent album. And very innovative for the time. Now, we're going to stick with the black metal. To me, I got my cassette still somewhere floating around. I should have pulled that out instead, but anyways, when this album came out, this one was a big FU to Scott Burns and the Florida death metal scene. And this is Dark Throne, A Blaze in the Northern Sky. This was, when it came out and I heard it for the very first time, I thought, whoa. This is of the same quality that me and my friends are working with, recording on this little tape player in the basement of my house. And yet, a band put it out as an album. And of course, at the time, I'm into, your Morbid Angels, Deaths, Deicides, Obituary. And this was very, very different. Very different. Very lo-fi, low budget, very raw. And basically, it was their big, middle finger up FU to Scott Burns and his, too perfect of a sound for metal, death metal. And that's where you got this. And this is a quintessential old school black metal album that you have to have. It's very, very well written. Even though it had the really rough demo tape quality sound, it added to the mystique of the album and the overall, you know, feeling and aura that this album brought out. So to have this album sound like the bands, really crisp and clean, of the Florida scene in the early 90s that was really popular, it just wouldn't work. And I think, because I mean, these guys started off with a Soulside Journey, and they were more of, it had European sound to it, but death metal, and it was, you know, melodic and everything, but they just did not like how everything was going too crisp and clean and decided to make it dirty, and this album was dirty. And it was a game changer, especially for me, not having to think that what I have in the popular death metal bands or whatever, that's the end-all be-all. And this album does just as much with lesser quality sound, and it still comes off as a fantastic album. So check this out. For some reason, if anybody out there hasn't and you're into black metal, you gotta own this album. And we are still, I gotta move here. Man, oh man, I'm already over 20 minutes. I gotta stop talking so much. Okay, so the birth of Grindcore. I don't care what anybody says, this is the birth of Grindcore as it is. Repulsion, Horrified. This was recorded in 1986. There were no bands, okay, sorry. There were bands like, you know, your Venoms, Early Destruction and everything, but no band at the time was able to stand up the same speed, ferocity as this band. When they decided to do this as a band and record an album, they thought, everybody's doing it at this speed, let's do it faster and let's do it heavier. And that's exactly what they did. And from this album, it gave birth to a genre, which is known as Grindcore. The absolute speed, the blasting. For 1986, this is a huge album. A huge album in the underground to come out. And still, to this day, there's few albums that could rival something like this, especially when you're comparing the time that this came out in 86. This is just unheard of at the time. Killer album. And okay, back again. Made a little mess up here, dropping stuff. So anyways, down to 3 CDs here. And a friend of mine on YouTube here, his channel Mr. Boulder, I noticed in his still picture on Instagram, he had posted that he did his response video, and I saw in the picture he showed this album, and I'm like, ah, damn, he beat me to it. Pestilence Spheres. Now, this album, so I was a fan of Pestilence. Of course, in the early 90s, like, Pestilence was a killer death metal band. And this album came out. So I read in the magazine the hype and everything, and it was to be different. So I got it, of course. My copy here. Okay, you'll see, I don't know if you can see that. What's that, $10.99 I spent? What was different about this album and what makes it innovative was it was not your typical death metal album. And basically the biggest thing was the sound, and by using synth guitars. Instead of just a wall of regular distortion, you've got 2 guitar players now doing synth guitar stuff. They make it very clear to state in this album there are no keyboards on this album. that's what it kind of sounds like, but nope, all synth guitars. So at first, when I heard it, I thought, what is going on here? I'm expecting Pestilence, and this was very different. But after, I still remember vividly my first spin of this album, I was hooked. They're very catchy and different songs. This, during a time of the death metal craze and the birth of death metal, this being 1993 when this came out, this was very different. They stayed true to the Pestilence sound-ish, but then made it very different. And yeah, with Patrick Mamelli doing vocals, Van Drunen's gone, did an amazing job. And realistically, the vocals were still, you know, comparable and similar, but different in their own ways. So it didn't make a big change, but it was the sound of the synth guitars. And it was something different, but after that first spin, I knew there was something special about this album. And I have loved it ever since, and I've never once heard an album that sounds like this, even comparable to this. So it's a popular Pestilence album, but it kind of shocked people when it came out, and rightfully so, because it was different. But still, an absolute one of my favorites. It stood the test of time, and not one band has come close to making something anywhere similar to this. So this keeps it very unique and very innovative. This one here, I have never actually come across any more copies. Never seen this band in a store, in any store that I've ever visited in. And I don't really hear a lot of people talk about them. But this band, Decoria. And this album was Wisdom Floats. So this came out in 95. Metal Blade put this out. And it was very, very different. A group of 4 guys that when they recorded this, they were all teenagers. I'm not sure if the youngest was around 16 or something at the time, but so this kind of fell into the category of, you've got bands that are really, really taking off, like your melodic bands, Paradise Lost, your My Dying Brides, Enchantment. And this album came out, but yet it was very different. It was not like the rest of the bands within this, you know, melodic doom type category. These guys took on a very lighter approach. It was almost like it doesn't sound like this band at all, but it was more of a Pink Floyd approach within this genre. And it was very, you know, they had some female vocals in, very light and airy stuff. It was light and soothing. But then they had some, you know, distorted guitar in there, and it was melodic, very melodic album. But it was just Pink Floyd-ish out there. Very different. For the time and for the bands around, like in the metal scene, this to me was just innovative. It was something different. And I don't know how many people, if you know this album, if you remember this album. I've kept my CDs since I bought it brand new, and I have never seen anybody talk about it since then. And yeah, so if you want something different, I'm going to try to hopefully find a link somewhere, and I'll make sure to add it to the video here, whether it's on YouTube or somewhere. I haven't heard anything from the band, so I don't even know what other releases they came up with, if they're still going. I hadn't even bothered to check yet, because this is really the only thing that I've got from them, and it was just, yeah, very different. Cool different, though. Like, if you want a nice, chill, relaxing night, this is something that you'd want to put on. Now, this last one. This is a band that's gotten a fair bit popular, to the point where they're definitely no longer underground and haven't been for quite some time now. Very much in the mainstream. Of course, they didn't start out that way, but they've gotten a lot of flack in the metal community for not being metal enough. Whatever that even means. Like, to some elitists out there, you have to fit into a mold, into a category, and if you're not in it, you're like, whatever, a poser or whatever. But when this album came out, at first I didn't know what to think. I thought, is this like some sort of album that's just mocking, or like, what is this? Very, very different. And the band is Ghost. So now I'm showing this one, nice slipcover there, because anything after this album I'm not really interested in that much. I lost interest, but this album I absolutely love. Reason being was there was no band that sounded like this. So they fall into the metal category, but yet everything, mainly you picture like a metal band, like wall of noise guitars, loud guitars, whatever. This was very pulled back. Excuse me. It was nowhere near as distorted. It almost had like a rock mentality tone to the guitar. They're singing about the devil, Satan, all this stuff. Very evil type lyrics. But it had a pop sensibility to it. Now, I'm not into pop music whatsoever. But what made it interesting was kind of blending this, you know, toe tapping, finger snapping pop with like a rock metal tone and then really evil satanic lyrics. So it was just different, but catchy as hell. All the choruses are sing-along type choruses. Each song was very different and catchy. And really, I mean, this band hit a niche market, and then obviously, like, you know where they're at now. They exploded. And they're extremely popular. Even to the point where my local radio station, which only for the most part plays like up to about 90s alternative music pretty well, plays this on regular rotation. I mean, that speaks volumes for the band on how big they've gotten. But like I said, anything after this album I really don't care too much about, but this was an innovative album because it was very different and very catchy. And of course they've got the big theatrics, which made it something too, you know, all the costumes and everything. But it was, for me, more just the music, the sound. And I found what they did was very fresh at the time when it came out. So very worthwhile listening to. And if you're a Ghost hater, don't hate on me. I like what I like, so whatever. Anyways, that was my excessively long response video. So once again, congratulations, James, hitting 200. It was pointed out to me, like, and I can't believe I keep forgetting to mention, I believe it was Mr. Boulder mentioned on one of my other videos a while back, oh, congratulations, you hit over 100. And I was like, oh, wait, what? I had no clue. I don't even know what I'm at now, like under 120 or something like that. But like everybody else, I'm grateful for for having these people like, subscribe, and everything. So it's been great. And yes, once again, congratulations, James. And I'm going to stop talking. This is my entry. Goodbye.